Welcome back to another edition of Force Friday, where we talk about Star Wars theories, characters, concepts, comparisons, analyzations, collectibles, and more. And today we're going to be talking about the arrogance of the Jedi, a topic that I've wanted to kind of tackle for a while. It kind of tied into my Luke Skywalker conversation that we had a year back or so. But for the last few years, the Jedi of the prequel era have come to be known as fallen idols. Most fans accept that their intention of the prequels was to show the flaws of the Jedi Order at time and how those flaws led to the Empire and state of the galaxy as seen in the original trilogy. But this wasn't always the case. When the prequels were released, a common criticism among fans was that the Jedi were boring. Many had waited decades to see full-fledged Jedi Knights at the height of their power, and while we got some of that in scenes like Duel of the Fates or Battle of Geonosis, most of the scenes with prequel Jedi come off as dry, dull, detached, and extremely slow-paced. As we gradually learned, the intention of the Jedi in these films was to show the flaws in the Order at the time. Within the universe, the Jedi of the prequel era, or Age of the Republic, are also largely presented as almost disgraced icons. Take the Phantom Menace. 1,000 years before, the last Sith Lord was supposedly killed. Yet when one of their own, Qui-Gon Jinn, a Jedi Knight, stood before them and told them he believed he had encountered a Sith, he was immediately met with disbelief and fear. Despite the fact that a red-skinned, yellow-eyed, red-blade-wielding, dark force-using, layer-upon-layer of black cloak-wearing, devil-looking martial artist had attempted to kill a Jedi. Possibility of it being a Sith was extremely difficult for them to believe. Why? Because they're in a state of complacency. They're part of the Jedi Order. The same Jedi Order that vanquished the Sith. It would be impossible for a Sith to return because we're so good at what we do, and what we do is kill some Sith. Of course, the Jedi eventually faced facts and conceded the Sith had indeed survived. But this disbelief doesn't show caution or logic, but instead fear, and as we previously discussed, arrogance. And I believe that the fear is coming from a place that they know they aren't probably as sharp as their order used to be. And because of that, they're not sure if they could even handle the problem, which we know ultimately they couldn't. The Jedi had grown to fear the dark side so much that they couldn't fathom the idea of its return. Jedi, like Qui-Gon Jinn, who was something of a rebel, believed the code was too rigid and was appalled by the Jedi's blind devotion to the Republic. He was willing to disobey the Council countless times, being one of the few Jedi to stand up to Master Yoda and Master Windu. Qui-Gon was a truer Jedi than many would argue. Much has also been made of the Jedi standing by the Galactic Republic. While the base aims of the Republic were true and just, by the time of the prequels it had long decayed into an ineffectual system full of self-serving greedy politicians and bureaucracy. Take the small planet of Naboo. It had a seat in the Senate equal to the seat held by the Trade Federation, a massive corporation which clearly held sway over the pockets of senators and bureaucrats. While the Jedi often shook their heads and mumbled under their breath about this and that, they rarely ever do anything against the wish of the Republic, even when those wishes were wrong. This is the primary reason Jedi like Dooku fell to the dark side. Whatever he became, his reasons for leaving the Order, that the Jedi had become blind tools of the Republic and fallen from the light, were true. He was wrong for all the right reasons, if that makes sense. The Jedi had grown so devoted to their way of life that they became detached from the reality around them. Take midichlorians. Now, you guys know I feel a way about midichlorians, but let me tell you how I've come to kind of swallow them, so to speak. Midichlorians serve as a conduit for the Force. The more midichlorians someone has, the more inherently strong in the Force they are. But anyone can increase their midichlorians and connection to the Force. As Dave Filoni said, take Bruce Lee as an example. He has, if you like, a lot of talent for martial arts, or a very high midichlorian count. If I train in martial arts, can I learn martial arts? Yes, I can improve my midichlorian count in that discipline. Will I be as good as Bruce Lee? No, that's not my talent. Every being in existence has midichlorians, and it is official canon that we can all learn, or at least sense the Force, and with years of training possibly even wield it. Yet by the prequels, the Jedi dismissed Force sensitives based solely on their inherent potential. And I have come to believe that midichlorians are somewhat of a metaphor for the state of the Jedi at the time. They've detached themselves from the living Force and instead fallen back upon a more scientific look at something that's far more spiritual. It may have some scientific basis, as many theologies do, but you lose the spiritual side and the soul side when you focus focus purely on the scientific side, which is what they had become, more devoted to their order than to the Force. Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars are where the Jedi's failings really come to light. The Jedi are not above killing and never have been. While they seek peaceful and non-violent solutions where possible, they're willing to end an opponent's life if they deem it necessary, for their own safety or the safety of others. However, the Jedi Order was founded on the idea of peaceful, non-violent solutions to peace. As Obi-Wan says, the guardians of peace and justice. Yet the Jedi become generals in a grand army, leading a charge to put down a separatist movement. Conflict is and always has been a necessary part of a Jedi's path, but open warfare is something that goes against every principle they have. For the first year of the war, the Jedi were largely hailed as heroes, and although many felt discomfort about their new roles, the majority deemed the war necessary to ensure galactic peace. Some, such as the then heroic Anakin Skywalker, become galactically recognized as heroes. The Jedi were all too aware of the corruption and relative ineffectiveness of the Republic, but seemed to simply hope it would correct itself, never interfering and rarely protesting decisions they disagreed with more than some words of disapproval. Yet we have to examine the clone troopers and the ethics of using such an army. While the clones are almost always willing soldiers fighting for each other and out of respect for their Jedi generals, whom many formed extremely close bonds with, the clones are nonetheless sentient beings bred only for combat. Most senators, and the cloners particularly, regarded the clone troopers as little more than tools, and most members of the public expressed surprise when they realized the clones were full-fledged individual beings. Some clones, such as Cut, deserted, as he saw no point in fighting in a war that made no sense to him. There were even clone traitors, such as Slick, who made a deal with Asajj Ventress to exchange Republic intel. Despite Slick's radical nature, his motivations are undoubtedly not without point. It's the Jedi who keep my brother enslaved. We do your bidding, we serve at your whim. I just wanted something more. I love my brothers, but I was striking a blow for all clones. As the war progressed and the intensity of the conflict increased, some Jedi began to question their roles in the war, some struggling with this more than others. Many Jedi, such as Nadhar and Pong, gradually fell to the dark side. 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, the final year of the war, many of the galaxy citizens had come to see the Jedi as prolonging the war in their refusal to step back from it. Notable advocates we see in Season 5 of Clone Wars, the Jedi Temple was subject to public protests. Or Barriss Offee, also in the Clone Wars, who said, I did it because I've come to realize what many people in the Republic have come to realize, that the Jedi are the ones responsible for this war, that we've so lost our way that we've become villains in this conflict. We are the ones that should be put on trial, all of us. And my attack on the Temple was an attack on what the Jedi have become, an army fighting for the dark side, fallen from the light that we once held so dear. The Republic is failing. It's only a matter of time. Not only that, but throughout the war, the Jedi were fully aware that both sides were being manipulated by the Sith. Even knowing that Dooku was directly responsible for the clone army, they knew a mysterious Sith master was manipulating events. They knew that the Republic was rampant with corruption and decay. Since the rising darkness led sentient beings into a war, and despite all this, they continued to serve the Republic. Of course, Sidious was behind it all. He's the one ultimately responsible. But the point that we're trying to show is not about who's responsible. It's about the Jedi being so arrogant that even in their efforts to do the right thing, they couldn't see the forest from the trees and could only play a part in a larger plan to do the arguably wrong thing. It says so much that Sidious could easily manipulate the Jedi. He knew that their rigorous dogma would result in them blindly following the strings of his marionette. By the time of Revenge of the Sith, the public was readily willing to believe the Jedi were traitors. They failed because their belief in the light became arrogance that it could not fail them. This is no more evident than in Empire Strikes Back. Throughout the prequels, for all his talk, Yoda willingly leads the Jedi into war. Yet in Empire, he dismisses it, advocating peace above all else. He has come to realize that the Jedi going to war and blindly serving a decaying government was wrong, and imparts that wisdom to Luke, which continues through The Last Jedi, which understands that the Jedi failed perfectly. Luke's actions in that film, isolating himself, trying to end the Jedi, are wrong, and they are shown to be wrong in that film. He gradually realizes his wrongdoing in that movie, but his lessons to Rey stay true. His first is that the Force and the light doesn't belong to the Jedi. Despite the prequel Jedi serving the Force, they were intensely guarded about it, and as discussed, arrogant, not only in their intentions, but guarding in who they thought could have access to it. And perhaps had they not been, would have put Anakin went on a completely different path. As Luke says, at the height of their power, the Jedi allowed Darth Sidious to rise, create the Empire, and wipe them out. The Jedi had such belief in their own devotion to the light and in the history of their own order that any conception of weakness within that philosophical structure would collapse the house of cards they built for themselves. In a deleted scene, Luke tells Rey pillagers come to the local village once a month to raid and steal. Yet he tells her the old Jedi way, meaning the way of the prequel era, would be to not interfere, as balance could not be maintained. And next month, when Rey is gone, the pillagers would only return in greater numbers. Luke clearly believes that the Jedi's code and rules were too rigid, advocating adherence to them even when it's blatantly wrong. Sometimes an organization can become so true and steadfast in their own ways, as opposed to what their ways have evolved from, that they lose sight of the initial principle and instead fall victim of their own tradition, which is what Luke fixed. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.